Welcome to Climbing Together, the small business experience. I'm Beth Houtrow, founder of Climb the Small Business Book Club, and every episode I talk to a small business owner about a mistake that they've made and what they learned from the experience. Mistakes are inevitable, perfection's impossible, so let's embrace the mistake. And today we're so excited to welcome Joanna Parzakonis to the podcast. Joanna, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Thanks so much for having me. My business is a bookstore in BookBug. We're a small independent bookstore in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I say small because in the context of bookstores, we are small, but we've grown in our past 15 years to occupy 2 storefront locations and do have a lot of space to welcome community, which is part of our mission in having the bookstore.
I love your bookstores, and it's so exciting to have independent bookstores back in Kalamazoo. What felt like there was a bit of a drought there. And so, yes, thank you so much for having that business. And I love your coffee shop that's in there. And yeah, it's just a great place to be. All right, but we're here to talk about mistakes. So tell me about a mistake that you made when you were first launching your business.
So the biggest mistake I made at the outset of the business was in actually constructing the space. Our space occupied half of what BookBug occupies now. So it was a pretty finite unit within Oakwood Plaza. We had 1,200 square feet, and we designed the space intentionally to house what we anticipated to be our necessary inventory and to allow us some space to grow. What we did in designing that space was build these beautiful, wonderful, permanent bookshelves onto our floor, strong and the precise wood that I wanted them to be. We traveled to outside of Chicago to somebody who could build them for us, custom at the size. So they housed beautifully my first inventory of middle grade fiction, which is still a very important category of fiction for us, for kids ages 8 to 12 in a loosely defined way. What I didn't know at the time and what I came to know very soon after is that in retail space, especially space that is intentional about bringing people in and having them have conversations or story times or musical performances or a display of art, which is what we always intended to do, not having the ability to adapt our space in these preciously built, beautiful, again, so proud to have built them and to have designed them and kicked myself mightily within the first 18 months at the fact that I did not place actual wheels onto several of my floor units. That's something that guided everything that I built thereafter and or imagined in future spaces, and or adaptable in some way so that the shelves needed to change sizes or the inventory needed to adapt to our market. So that middle grade fiction may not always have been, but now to this day in BookBug, those shelves sit in the center of the space and they proudly sit there thanks to the fact that we've grown bigger. But had that not been the case, I would have had to really deconstruct my precious shelves.
Well, I think I know what you're talking about. I take my nieces and nephews in there every Christmas. We do like a shopping trip. So yeah, I think I know those shelves that you're talking about. Nice. Well, and so I know those bookshelves were very important to you. So is there something out of that, some advice that you give to entrepreneurs as they're growing their business?
Yeah, I think so. I think every entrepreneur or anybody who's brought into the idea of beginning a business should have a driving passion and should imagine themselves as the consumer of their business if possible, which I certainly did from the outset. But because of that passion and because of how close we feel to what we're doing, we do tend to be precious at times in many aspects of our business, and we tend to want to maintain control. Crafting our newsletter is something I feel pretty precious about. Creating content for media is something that I feel pretty precious about. Understanding our costs and what we can afford or what we can't afford is something I feel precious about. Each one of those things are things that I've had to learn not to be so precious about, to welcome other voices into our media feeds, to welcome new content into our newsletter, to understand that costs of running a business, though they do seem scary and seem like for several years I was able to underpay myself, that habit and or that preciousness in those particular ways can lead to the destruction of your business. They really can. Not understanding that valuing self and valuing time, not just of yourself, but of those who you employ, is a hugely important thing to do. And devaluing that is not something that is okay really ever. Again, sort of the metaphorical wheels onto my preciously built business model has been so necessary to be able to adapt and to be able to understand how I needed to grow and continue to need to grow as a leader of a business if it is to thrive and grow.
I love that metaphor. Yeah. So these bookshelves that you loved and were passionate about, but quickly realized you needed to make them more agile and be able to be, more flexible. And you've had to be flexible yourself and a little bit, more agile or resilient in letting people take over pieces of the business so you could help it grow. Yeah, that's a very cool metaphor. All right. Well, so this podcast is brought to us by Climb the Small Business Book Club. And our two tenets are continual learning and community. So, of course, for learning, we love books. You're a bookstore owner. So talk to us about a book or two that's meant something to you as you grow your business.
I am going to say two, because the first one at the outset of imagining the business is a pretty, it's considered a Bible in many retail spaces. It's a book called Why We Buy by Paco Underhill. It was written many years ago. It has since been updated. I did read that book at the advice of other retail store owners at the time, and specifically bookstore owners. What Paco does in that book is talk about human psychology and how human beings engage in physical spaces, which was foundational to me to understand, like, what do we see in patterns of behaviors about where people move to when they enter a retail space, right? They often look to the right. They don't look all the way to the left. These kinds of really basic elements that help me understand how, again, to design the space, and maybe made me too precious about saying this is going here and this is going there. So, and has since evolved into talking about virtual spaces and engagement online and those types of things. So that book is very important. I don't always love reading nonfiction. As a bookstore owner, I have a strong preference for fiction in all categories, because I think fiction pushes me on a human level into exploring the internal experience that a human being has when they're engaging with specifically the contemporary world. I love reading contemporary fiction. So anyway, I am going to talk about a contemporary fictional book that's brand new that I read recently and really woke me up into my understanding of what it means for me to be an employer, what it means for me to be working every day, what it means for me to be operating a business that depends on earning money on a daily basis. The book is called Ripe, and it follows a character who has moved from the Midwest to San Francisco in relatively recent history. It does seem to be pre-pandemic, but that's neither here nor there, and has accepted a job at a high-tech company. And the pace of work and the culture of work, and in the context of an area of our country that has both concentrated wealth and concentrated poverty, within very close proximity to each other. And what was different about this book, and what seemed to be magnified in the experience that this young character has of reckoning with her humanity in the context of the pace of expectations of her job, the inability to afford some of the most basic things at a relatively high salary in a place where the cost of living was so high, was not at all unfamiliar to me, even though its context was separate. It was a very clear sort of reckoning with what it is we're doing, living today in a economy that is competitive capitalism, right? We're all trying to make the resources to make our lives function, right? Or make our businesses function and have those resources have a healthy balance. And there's something fundamentally dangerous within that formula in the modes of work or in the modes of leadership. And that's where, for me, this book really shone a light on the ways that management messaging to employees, on the ways that anybody who had any sort of authority over this main character was speaking in a way that actually I found quite familiar to the ways that I can speak about what our goals need to be and how we need to perform. That woke me up into the experience of being managed in 2023 and how I need to adapt and sort of build humanity. If humanity is at the core of my business, which it always has been, the celebration of connecting on a human level, then I have an obligation to understand how it feels to somebody to say, right, paid time off needs to be limited in a really specific way, or we need to make our sales benchmarks, which we do. And still, how much of a priority are we giving these things over the creative and or the soul filling purpose that brought me to this work and that brought many individuals into wanting to be a part of the work?
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So thank you for sharing both of those books. I'm just back from the Bay Area. I'm that Midwesterner who moved out there. And so I have to give that a read. I'm sure I'll relate to a lot of it. Very cool. All right. Yeah. And our last question is, talk to me about how you built community around you with other entrepreneurs, other small business owners.
Well, in building my business plan, the American Booksellers Association, which is the national trade association for independent booksellers, was foundational for me for calling data, for making phone calls to its staff for advice, for trying to find resources in the actual building of my business. So that was foundational. Then our regional trade organization became also foundational within the first weeks of having opened, to say, can I find a mentor? Can I ask questions on an ongoing basis? Can I visit many bookstores? And I always do wherever I go, to sort of talk to them about what challenges they're having or what ideas are really working in their spaces or in their communities. So that community is essential. I go to our annual trade show always. I try to go to our national trade show as much as possible. And we also have some specialty learning sessions that are now increasingly virtual, which is great in terms of access and cost for a store my size, to broaden our access to be able to talk to booksellers in Chicago all the time and booksellers in San Francisco, to imagine how to apply to our community great ideas that are working to build growth into other bookstores.
Nice. Well, yeah, that's awesome. I think that there's lots of industry groups out there, and the bookstore industry seems to have a really good community of support, and which is amazing. So to all our listeners, if you run a bookstore, do not try and figure that out on your own. There's lots of resources out there to support you. All right. Well, Joanna, that's our podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is brought to you by Climb the Small Business Book Club, where entrepreneurs go to learn, discuss, apply, and grow. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe at Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or follow us on Instagram at Climb Book Club. And always remember, mistakes are inevitable, perfection's impossible. So let's embrace the mistake.